Good evening once again. I'm Stephanie Ruhle, and we are now just 25 days away from the election and in the wake of back-to-back natural disasters. The Biden administration is now working overtime to combat a wave of misinformation about, of all things, rescue and recovery efforts, amplified by public figures like former President Donald Trump. Hurricane Helene might also have upended both presidential candidates' strategies to win the key battleground state of North Carolina. And the campaigns are in crunch time with less than a month to go. This week, Vice President Harris launched her long-awaited media blitz. She appeared interview after interview with a mix of traditional and very non-traditional outlets. Meanwhile, former President Trump rallied in the Rust Belt and made more promises to cut taxes, but no explanations of how to pay for them. Both are campaigning out west tonight. Harris is back in Arizona, and Trump takes on Colorado and Nevada. With that, you're in luck because it is Friday night, which means it's time for the nightcap. Molly Jong-Fast is here, a special correspondent for Vanity Fair and host of the Fast Politics podcast. Jelani Cobb joins us, staff writer at The New Yorker and dean of the Columbia Journalism School. Ahmed Baba is here, columnist for The Independent and author of the AhmedBaba.news. And John Allen is here, NBC senior national politics reporter and a dear friend of mine. Okay, Jelani, VP Harris answered a lot of questions this week from all sorts of people. How do you think she did?
I think Kamala Harris did what she needed to do this week. She's been out, not only the places that she answered the questions and how many questions she answered, but the places that she answered them. And so with presidential candidates, as you know, in presidential campaigns, they pretty much are saying variations on the same thing. This stop, maybe you switch it up. I'm really happy that the Detroit Tigers made the playoffs. Then you go to Pennsylvania. I'm sorry that the Phillies didn't, get further into. But fundamentally, you're going to be selling the same sort of product. And so I think the fact that she got out, she's on Call Her Daddy, she's on Howard Stern, she's bouncing around to all of these different demographies, really was the most important thing here.
Based on where she appeared and with whom, what voters do you think she's targeting in this last 30 days?
Well, so Call Her Daddy is women, right? And there are a lot of R's and I's in that group because we saw Alexis had some pushback, though I thought it ultimately was a very good interview. And she talked about, how she had become a sex crimes prosecutor. And that, I think, is an important part of her origin story. And then Howard Stern as men, I think that they should even let her do more of that and let her go to places like Theo Vaughn and,
going for that bro vote. That bro vote that Trump is focused on. I mean, we even heard Trump use the term beta male this week, which is something he doesn't know. It's been successful for him to sort of go for these young men. But in doing so, he could alienate young women. And maybe worse, that specific demographic, they're not so reliable when it comes to voting. Senior citizens, they voting. Young white men, I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, young people in general, but definitely young white men, young black men, young men. They're not the easiest demographic to get out. I think, look, I think when she's doing all these different venues, she's still looking for those voters that might not have made their decision yet, that might not have been sold on her yet. And Trump is doing exactly what he's done in the past, which is right back to the base. And I'm not even sure he has the ability to sort of break out of that, right? In 2020, it seemed very clear he had this kind of this sort of declining circle or small, shrinking circle that he was going after. And he thought, I'll just get all of them to show up. And they did, and he lost.
Right.
And we're seeing him do that again. But also, this is a time when both parties are trying to make sure that their parties are unified, that they are making sure that they get to that 98%, 95%
right.
that are going to stick with them. And I think Trump is doing that too right now.
What do you think of Elon Musk's involvement? Elon Musk, clearly a bro icon. There's tons of reasons why, originally people said, it was his ideology. Elon Musk is a true independent. That's why he likes Donald Trump, who's not an independent. But there's more and more reporting that he's more than just endorsing Trump. He is all in a big, big way. What does that say to you?
It's been interesting to watch Elon Musk become increasingly radicalized over the last several years.
I'd say
radicalized. I used to admire him back in the Tesla SpaceX days when he would talk about climate change, right? And now we're seeing him just believe it's like he's created a propaganda arm in Twitter and then he's consuming it. Just like back when Trump used to follow only far-right grifters on Twitter and then kind of, basically read what he was peddling. And now, I think really what it comes down to is self-interest. I think it is the tax cuts, essentially. I mean, that's the bulk
It's
of it.
so much more than
and
that,
regulation
right.
and
Right, the AI.
deregulation, the AI stuff, and also I think
cultural
cultural
issues,
stuff too. I think especially the stuff where you see with
Anti-trans.
his trans daughter, how he's like from that moment you can kind of see a focal point where I began to see how that radicalization just accelerated.
But it's also a move for ultimate power. You and I have talked about this before. I mean, one of the most significant things that is going to happen in the next 10 years is how AI is going to develop here in the United States and around the world. Who is the next president is going to dramatically impact that. And for Elon Musk, who has all of the money, he can then translate that into all of the power, having the ability to get whatever he wants from a president. So do you actually believe, right? Ahmed just said, well, he's become radicalized. He believes all this. Do you actually believe that he believes all this Trump stuff, or he's all in because a Trump win is a huge win for him to basically become a shadow president?
I think he believes some of it. I think he feels a cultural affinity for what Trump is talking about, and I don't think he would be doing what he is doing now, or to the extent that he's doing it now. And remember, he launched Ron DeSantis on Twitter, and that huge fail. Right, and DeSantis talks even more to some of those cultural issues than Trump does. So I think he feels it. I will say this: Elon Musk is going to make a ton. I was going to use another word. A ton of money off of the U.S. government, no matter who is in charge.
Correct.
Because our entire space program is now on his back. And Tesla was built on government subsidies, and we're now investing in more renewables. So you can see how just those existing industries are going to continue to feed him. And in addition to your point, the guy with the most money is best positioned to be the person who advances AI the most.
And I wanted to add on that, too, because you can see he felt scorned by the Biden administration, kind of not inviting him to those electric vehicles.
Okay, and let's be clear. It's fair to say there's a lot of terrible things Elon Musk has done, a lot of terrible things he said. But if the White House is going to throw an event where they're focused on electric vehicles and not invite Elon Musk, come on now.
Right.
Yeah, and yeah.
Well, I mean, realistically, the other part of this is that, to the question of whether or not he's a true believer, he at least says that he's moving his entire company out of California to Texas over trans issues. That's a kind of...
And taxes.
And taxes.
And taxes. But why would... if it's taxes, you can just say taxes. Why do you throw in trans issues in there if you don't actually really believe this? The other thing about this is that I'm old enough to remember when Elon Musk was wary about AI. When he first dipped his toe into that arena, he said he wanted to keep an eye on what was going on.
He's wary about other people's AI. He has never, ever been wary about his own. It's about who has control of it. What he's wary of is that people that aren't him are controlling it.
Yeah. I also think that the one thing we have to realize about Elon is that there's a lot of other stuff going on there, right? He's not doing amazing. He's had many wives. He's had many children. I mean, this is not like a super stable guy.
Let's talk about these young male voters, though, because we saw President Obama in Pennsylvania for Harris making a direct appeal to men. We know the Harris campaign is making a big effort to use Tim Walz to do the same thing. Next week, VP Harris has a town hall with Charlemagne the God. What is your take on this concern that she's got a weakness, or there's a weakness, or maybe an opportunity with men?
So there are a couple of things. Like and this has been centered, the conversation has been centered specifically around young black men and whether or not Kamala Harris has a weakness there. And there are a few problems with that idea. The first is that it overlooks the fact that Democrats have seen declining support among young black men since 2008.
And why is that?
Well, there are a whole array of things, one of which, the most fundamental of which, is the question of whether or not the Democratic Party has actually engaged that electorate or just taken it for granted. And so there's a very easy line that we saw. I was really surprised to hear Barack Obama echo this in saying that, well, maybe people have a problem with voting for a woman for president. Well, you know, black men voted for Hillary Clinton at a rate higher than they voted for Joe Biden.
Right.
And so it's not that simple. And by most calculations, Kamala Harris may wind up with more of the black male vote than Joe Biden got. And there's certainly some sexism in there, but we can't say that that's the driving force over multiple election cycles in which men have also been candidates.
But one of the reasons that you've seen declining support among black men for Democrats since 2008 is that Barack Obama was a first-time candidate.
Sure.
In 2008, right? So there was something new to get excited about. So it's not, I don't think it's shocking that there's been, you know, decline from that, right?
Well, but even Obama himself suffered a decline from 2008 to 2012.
What I'm not sure about, and maybe somebody's got a good answer for this, is does Barack Obama scolding young black men have the effect that he wants it to have? And do the young voters really remember Barack Obama's presidency, right? If you're talking, if you're 18 to 22, you know, I mean, you were a kid when Barack Obama was president. I guess the one, can I? Okay.
Yeah, please.
I was just going to say one other thing. The sort of corollary to that would be, I'm not sure that there is anybody that is a leader nationally of young black men in the way that you might have seen. And I think this is a good thing because of growing economic and opportunities and everything. But in the way you would have seen with like a Martin Luther King or, you know, in generations past where you might be able to identify, or Jesse Jackson, say, this is somebody who may be able to speak to young black men and encourage them to do X, Y, or Z. I don't think there is that person anymore. And it's probably because for some very good societal reasons, but on a voting level, I think it makes it more difficult.